All right, Jean, it's the top of the hour and we're recording, so it's all on you, my friend.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to see you all, or good evening, I should say, whatever. Good day, whether it's day or night in your neck of the woods. Today is Thursday, and it is March 25th already. Wow. This month is just flying by. And this is the Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. And so it's a pleasure to have everyone here. Our special guest today is Michael Lang. I'll introduce him in a moment, but first of all, some of the fun housekeeping matters. First of all, this is being recorded. You all saw that as you came in. But let's see, how are we doing with the donations, Natalie? Everyone is so generous. It's fantastic.
Jean, I'll take that. Good morning to everybody. As everybody knows, we don't charge. It's okay. We don't charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask people to contribute to a food bank, either of their choice or one designated by our guest speaker every week. And our audiences have been so generous ever since Natalie Armstrong-Moton founded the Will Work for Food project last spring when the lockdowns began. So hats off to Natalie for that, and hats off to our audiences in the ADR and litigation communities. So far, our audiences have contributed $93,805 worldwide to combat food insecurity. Thank you so much to everybody. Jean, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. That's just so fantastic. We're going to hit 100,000, if not this week, then I would guess within 2 weeks, but that's just great. Thank you all for your generosity. So moving right along, today's speaker is Michael Lang. Michael's from Florida, and for over 40 years, Michael has mediated family, workplace, and organizational disputes. He has designed and presented introductory and advanced mediation and conflict management courses, workshops, and webinars in the US and internationally. Michael created one of the first graduate programs in conflict resolution in the US at Antioch University in 1992 and served in a similar role at Royal Roads University in Victoria, BC. He has authored The Practitioner's Guide to Reflective Practice in Conflict Resolution in 2019, co-authored The Making of a Mediator, Developing Artistry in Practice in 2000, and he is the lead author for a series of ebooks, Divorce and Separation, a Practical Guide to Making Smart Decisions. He is the co-creator and co-editor of Living Together, Separating, Divorcing, Surviving During a Pandemic, and Family Conflict During a Pandemic, Stories of Struggles and Hope, which is his latest book here in 2021. Michael has created a video series called In Their Voices, and he currently facilitates 9 monthly online reflective practice groups for practitioners. I believe that you can find information in his videos at www.thereflectivepractitioner.com. THEREFLECTIVEPRACTIONER.com. Couldn't have gotten that any longer, right, Michael? Yeah, that's great. Anyway, Michael, why don't you tell us about your charity or your food bank today, and then the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, to the three of you, Jean and Natalie and Jeff, I am just as a human who walks this planet grateful that you started this initiative and you're bringing people together and raising these funds. It's a remarkable enterprise, and I'm proud to be able to be one small part of that. So the food bank in our area that serves 2 counties is called All Faiths Food Bank. And although there are 1 or 2 other food banks in the area, I chose this one because for a couple of reasons. One, its breadth of service. And secondly, because it really does seek in an ecumenical way to address food insecurity.
Great. Thank you. Well, then it's about time to go ahead then and get to us talking about a reflective practice, correct?
I am.
Okay, and the food bank's location is in the chat, okay? So Michael, take it away.
Great. Thank you again, Jean and Natalie and Jeff. I'm going to share my screen in just a minute with some slides that I'd like to go through. I've mentioned to Jeff, who is moderating the chat, that if you have questions as we go along, you're welcome to ask them. Jeff is going to kindly has agreed to look at them and see if they fit during my conversation with you, or whether they're better held to the end. In any event, we will have time at the end for your comments, questions, and good. So I'm going to begin. Now let me just get it to the right mode. Hope you can all see, and we'll proceed. So this is my, sorry, I'm having a little difficulty here. Great, there we are. This is what I want to go through today. Just a general definition of what is reflective practice, and also a little bit of what it's not, because a lot of people have a misunderstanding about the nature of reflective practice. Secondly, because I am at heart a practitioner, so I'm always asking the question, what's in it for me? What's going to make a difference to my practice? How is something that I learn, something that I read, something that I study, how is it going to make a difference when I sit in the mediator's chair and work with my clients? I'm going to talk about reflective debrief, which is a process, a conversation between two or more people that utilizes reflective practice methods in order to help a practitioner improve the quality of their practice. And although the reflective debrief process can be used one-on-one, some people even do it solo. In the most effective, the most exciting, dramatic, and dynamic way to really use these methods is in a group. So as I said, at the end, I'm going to talk a bit about how you could start or join a reflective practice group. So I titled this, Does Practice Make Perfect? Because there is some notion that that's what we can do, that if we just keep practicing, that the more situations we encounter, the more work we do, the better will be the quality of our work. But as Jillian Michaels points out, if you're making a tremendous amount of mistakes, all you're doing is just deeply ingraining the same mistakes in your practice. So practice does not always make perfect. Practice is critical, but practice with reflection is what really improves the quality of people's practices. And there's, for those who like a little bit of humor, a quote from Stephen Wright. All right, I'm going to move on. So you may wonder what a dog raising its paw in the air has to do with the story that I'm about to tell, and how that relates to reflective practice. And I hope that that it will all become clear as I tell you this story. And the story goes back to 1985. And I had been a practicing mediator, although not a busy mediator, for a number of years before this. And I heard about an organization called the Academy of Family Mediators. And I was intrigued, and they were having their annual conference that year in San Rafael, California, which was the town adjacent to where my brother lived. It still does. And I thought, well, this will be a great opportunity. It's a twofer. I can go to the conference and I can spend some time with my brother. And so I did. And as I prepared to go, I made a couple of decisions. One, I am by nature an introvert. I don't do cocktail party kinds of conversation. But I said to myself, when I go, I am going to walk up to people walk up to strangers, introduce myself, and begin a conversation. I just needed to do that to make contact with people. And secondly, and here's how it relates to the dog with his or her paw raised, anytime there was an offer to be a mediator in a role play, my hand would be the first one up. And so it went. And the first morning, there was a workshop that I was really intrigued about called Ericksonian Hypnotherapy Approaches to Mediation. And it was based on the work of a psychiatrist named Milton Erickson, who used stories really for hypnotherapy. And there's a book written about him, and I read the book about him, and I read some of Erickson's work when I was doing some studying in family therapy. So I was really intrigued to go. And we walked into this a fairly large room. There were probably 50 to 60 people attending this workshop. And all around the room on sheets of butcher paper were printed 26 different techniques that the presenters had gleaned from Milton Erickson and that they were teaching us to use in mediation practice. And the first hour and a half, they went through these and described them and talked about them. We took a break, and immediately when we returned, they asked for, and there went my hand. As the word volunteer left their lips, my hand was raised, and there I was doing a mediation in front of 50 to 60 people. And you have to understand that I practiced in Maine. Nobody ever saw what I did. And that's really true. So much of our work anyway, we do it in private for good reason. But I was really determined that I needed to get some feedback, to have some understanding of whether what I was thinking I was doing as mediation was actually good, decent, effective, and helpful. Two people were then invited to play their roles, and I won't describe in detail what the issue was, but we got the mediation started, and it went on for about 25 minutes. I had no idea. For me, it seemed like 3, but I later learned that it was about 25 minutes. And it ended when the 2 presenters came up and stood behind me, each with a hand on my shoulder to stop the mediation. And they said to me, "That was absolutely brilliant." Well, imagine how I felt. Pretty good, to have that kind of a compliment in that situation. And the 2 role players also provided really, kind and generous comments. They thought that what I did was useful, it was effective, it made a difference for them. And throughout then the rest of the conference, people would come up to me and they would say, "How'd you learn how to do that? Lawyers aren't supposed to know how to do stuff like that. That was terrific. Who are you again?" And it was magnificent because I was getting some feedback, and I was getting to meet people, both of 2 of my goals. But we stayed. It was at a Catholic school in San Rafael. We stayed in little dorm rooms, and I would go back to my room at night and lie on my bed and look up at the ceiling and say to myself, "You're a fraud." And the reason I would say that is because I knew that there was no way I could replicate what I had done, because I didn't know what I had done. It just sort of flowed out of me. I had no real basis to understand my own approach. I didn't have any real theory to back me up. I had no way of understanding why one particular intervention was useful. So I couldn't repeat it in any other situation or circumstance. So it was really bittersweet for me. And I was determined that there were two things that I took away from that experience. One was that I needed a real solid grounding in theory in order to be able to structure my interventions according to certain values and principles. But that was really key, because then I could assess why something might be working and why something might be less effective. And the second lesson that I took away was I needed to figure out how it was that I could learn from my experience. I would have these experiences, but if I couldn't learn from them, then they were a succession of one-offs. I couldn't just say, well, because something worked with this in this situation, it will necessarily work in another. I couldn't believe that that was necessarily true. Also at that conference, I was introduced to a book called The Reflective Practitioner by a man named Donald Schoen. And I went home, I thought about it, and a few months later I bought the book and I began to read it, and my eyes, I had one of those moments like you see in cartoons, you know, where eyes go bulging out of the cartoon character when they recognize something. Well, that's what was happening for me, was the realization that there was a way in which I could learn from my experience and improve the quality of my work so that I could feel more confident about what I was doing and more competent for the benefit of the clients. I want to say before I move on to the next slide that although I'm talking about reflective practice in the context of mediation, in fact, Donald Schoen was a professor at MIT in the School of Architecture, and the examples used in his book come from the School of Architecture. It's also true, and I have used reflective practice with attorneys and with people who practice conflict coaching. And in writing my books, I understand that there are applications of reflective practice in accounting, in nursing, social work, teaching, even athletic coaching. So what I want to say is this isn't a method that's designed to alter your practice. It doesn't require that you learn a bunch of new strategies and techniques. It doesn't mean that your style of practice is altered as a result. What happens is that through the process of reflective practice, you learn how to enhance the application of the skills. You learn how to bring to bear the knowledge you already have in a way that allows you to be increasingly effective and responsive to the parties. So here are two definitions of reflective practice. It's understood as the process of learning through and from experience toward gaining new insights of self and or practice. And here's from Schoen. And in particular, this is the one that I use most in my own thinking. That the process occurs when the practitioner allows himself or herself to experience surprise, puzzlement, or confusion in a situation which he finds uncertain or unique. Because what I'm really interested in helping people is with those surprising moments, where there's an awkwardness or there's a puzzlement on the part of the mediator. And it could be in a situation such as I described at the conference, one where I did something really, really well, but I was puzzled because I couldn't fully grasp what had happened and why it had worked. And it's also used in situations where people are puzzled because they bumped up against an experience with their clients that is in some way different, and their strategies and techniques aren't working the way they expect that they might. So I want to distinguish reflective practice from processes that are helpful, but that really are not reflective practice. And I'll explain a little bit more. So here are 4. A lot of us do this, especially those of us who tend to be more introverted, like me. We review the situation, we mentally retell the events. We go over them and over them and over them, sort of the way you might reread a book or watch a film again and again, because there's something that's interesting and intriguing. But the problem is that you don't always use it as an opportunity to learn. You may retell it in a way of saying, wow, that went really, really well. Or, gee, that didn't go as I expected it to. But it's not necessarily associated with learning that can help you develop your skills to be more effective in the future. Secondly, making case notes. A great thing to do. Lots of people like to make case notes. They do it partly because they need to keep track of what's happening, but also people make case notes because it's a way of writing down. It's doing on either on your computer or with pencil and paper what the mentally retelling does. You're writing down the events. You're making some notes, but again, without some process of reflection, there's not genuine learning that's likely to occur. It could, but it's less likely. Often, the third is often we hang out with colleagues. We used to be able to do it at conferences where you'd, in between sessions, you'd have a cup of coffee or you'd have lunch with somebody or dinner, and you talk about your work and you discuss, situations and, this happened and but again, it's the value of those conversations is often in building the human building the human connection. You're building relationships with colleagues. And secondly, if you talk about a situation and a colleague says, boy, oh boy, I have had those, I can't tell you how many times, it kind of normalizes things for you. You don't feel quite so isolated. And that's a real advantage to it. Again, is it learning? Not necessarily. And the last is asking colleagues for advice, opinions, or recommendations. We do this frequently. And here's the problem with that. The obvious one is they weren't there. They didn't sit in the chair that you were sitting in. They didn't see the people you were working with. They didn't hear the tone of voice. They're getting a snapshot of, you may talk about something that occurred over a period of 5 or 10 minutes in a 3-hour session. There's so many limitations. The other limitation that's really important is that they're not you. They don't think the way you do. And I'll tell you how I mean this. When I teach about the importance of theory shaping practice, one of the exercises I do is I give everyone in the group a simple scenario, and I ask them the basic question, what's going on here? What meaning do you give to the situation? And if there are 20 people in the group, there are 12 different answers. And the reason is because they think differently, and their answers are all valid, they're all useful. It's not that there's only one correct answer. So because I think differently, I'm looking across the screen, I think differently from Jean and Natalie and Maria and Jeff and Brian. And so each of us, faced with exactly the same situation, will have a different interpretation of what's taking place, and therefore our interventions are going to look quite different, even though we all might be wonderfully effective in doing what we do. So, for example, here's what can happen with feedback from colleagues. You often get this, well, here's what you should have done. Well, really? Why? You know, I don't have any basis for knowing why the person is offering that. So it has limited usefulness to me. Did you consider suggesting he should have an attorney? Why, again, would I do that? You know, without understanding the other person's thinking, the advice, well-intentioned, kind-hearted, thoughtful, and possibly very effective, is probably not going to fit what I need because they aren't me. So we could go through all of these, but I think you get the idea of this. So my point about this is practice alone doesn't make perfect. We become better, more adept, more resilient, more resourceful, and more effective if we learn through and from our experiences. And the process of reflection, a thoughtful, focused process, is what really helps us take a puzzling situation and get an aha moment that is both effective with respect to that particular situation, but it also enhances our learning so that in future situations, we're that much more adept at what we do. So here are the problems that I see that lead us to wanting to work in groups and wanting to get the kind of feedback, if you will, that comes through the process of reflection and in reflective practice groups. So A, we work in isolation. A longtime friend, Jay Fulberg, whom some of you probably know, addressed a conference, and he began his remarks this way. He said, mediation's a lot like sex. And he paused because he's smart and he knew it would get a good laugh, and it did. And he said, it's done in private and we don't often talk about it. And that's the situation that we find in. There's some of us who have the benefit of working in practices where we can share experiences with colleagues, but for the most part, we practice alone. Some of us practice in co-mediation, and that's a marvelous opportunity. But for the most part, we do practice in isolation. Secondly, we don't get to talk about it because of confidentiality. It really limits our ability. We need to be in a setting where we can be sure that what we relay is either altered in a way that protects the privacy of the people we're working with, or that we're talking with somebody who can be trusted to hold that confidence. Next, we don't have in the field of conflict resolution practice, we don't have systems for supervision or mentoring. In almost every other profession, that's true. In fact, I can't think of another profession where it isn't true, where people don't go through, as in medicine, an internship and a residency. Social workers are required to have, in most jurisdictions, 2,000 hours of supervised practice before they can become licensed. Teachers are supervised. I could go on and on, but I think you get the point, that we don't have this. People go to their 40-hour training. They attend continuing education classes, all of which is wonderful. But it's different from real supervision and genuine mentoring. And part of the reason is for this, and this is the last point I want to make here, is because training courses webinars like this, seminars, they involve collective, not individual learning. I mean, yes, you get sometimes people get to experience role plays and get particularized feedback on that. But by and large, the learning is collective. And reflective practice groups are an opportunity for us to learn with one another, and in a way that is lightly structured. And I'm going to talk a bit about what I mean by a structure. It's not regimented, but there is a particular format. So here are some of the reasons for reflective practice. Just summarizing what I've said. Practice alone doesn't make perfect. Secondly, success rates only tell a part of the story. You know, what's your percentage of success? Okay, good. I'm glad you know that in that sense, parties have reached agreement. That's marvelous. That's what we do this for, is to help parties. But that doesn't necessarily translate into continuing development and continuing their resourcefulness and improvement. Reflective practice gives us a way to talk about what was helpful and to learn from that and to learn why it was particularly helpful or why something was off the mark. Learning strengthens skills, deepens knowledge. It fundamentally, and this is quite interesting because it does track a bit with mediation. Just as we think about self-determination and mediation practice, it's very much the same in reflective practice and in reflective practice groups. It's a process of self-exploration. This is about the individual exploring the terrain of their own experience in order to learn something about themselves. And it results in self-discovery. And we know that self-discovery, just as we know about this in terms of working with parties in mediation, when they understand the issues at hand, when they have all of the information available to them in order to make sound decisions, they have the opportunity to make good choices. They discover the solution that makes sense to them. And the same thing is true with reflective practice. I want to tell you another story. And Jeff, if there are any questions at this point, this is a good moment. If not, I'll just keep meandering on.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So my first image was of a dog raising its paw. Now I've got tic-tac-toe. What in the world does this have to do with reflective practice and conflict practice? Well, I'll tell you. The story takes place on an evening flight, the last one of the night, from Atlanta to Sarasota. It's about a 1-hour flight. And I was on my way home and grateful. I'd been gone for a few days and I was really eager to get home and to be with my wife. And I had a very comfortable aisle seat. I sat down. I got out a book I wanted to read. And I noticed next to me in the middle seat was a young girl. She was probably 8 years old, may have been 7, may have been, but about 8 years old. And she was on her knees. This was before we started taxiing and so on. And next to her on the window side was a man whom I later figured had to be her dad, given the interaction between the two of them. And she was using the seat back console to play a game. She had a controller in her hand and she was intently focused on the little screen in front of her. Just the way that only children can have this fixation, this blocking everything else out. And she was just intent on playing this game, which I subsequently learned was tic-tac-toe. And it was with fishes and penguins instead of X's and O's. And she continued to play after we finished taxiing and we're in the air. And after a little while, she turned to her dad and she said, I don't know if I like this game very much. Nobody wins. It always ends up, with a tie. That's no fun. And the father said, so how are you playing the game? And she described. He said, is there any other way you could play the game? And she thought for a minute. Because what she had described is that she started with her, and she was the fish, and the computer was the penguin. She said, I put a fish in the middle. And then that's how I started. Okay. And then good, thank you for muting. She said, maybe I have an idea, she said. I'll put the fish up in a corner. The father said, well, let's see what happens. So she did, and she was quiet for 5 or 10 minutes. And then she said, Dad, I won 6 in a row. This is great. And then the father said, okay. And then she played the next game. She said, Dad, another tie. What am I going to do now? And the father said, well, what do you think? She said, I think the computer figured out how I was playing this game. And it changed the way it plays the game. And the father said, well, what do you need to do? She said, I need to think of a different way to play. And he said, well, what are those possibilities? And she thought of a different one. I don't remember now what it was. And she played that, and she won a couple more games, and she was bouncing on her knees on the seat. Well, and eventually, after all of this, we landed, and I wanted to turn to the father and just say, I wish that I could be a father like that. That was just, it was marvelous the way the two of them interacted. But what I also took away from it is that was a perfect example of what we try to do in our reflective practice groups, which is not the father had probably played tic-tac-toe from the time he was a child. He'd done it multiple times. He knew how to play the game. He knew there were different strategies and different ways to try to win. And he also knew that more often than not, you don't win. But he didn't say that to his daughter. He let her struggle with her frustration. He supported her, encouraged her, and she came up with the solutions. He didn't give her any of the solutions. She figured those out for herself. But he was there supporting, encouraging, and most of all, asking questions. And that's what the process of reflective debrief looks like when someone in our group presents a puzzling situation that they want to go over. So let me define a little bit. Let me just tell you a couple of examples of this. We in a recent group, the problem that was presented by a mediator was she wasn't sure how best to deal with. It was a commercial mediation situation. The parties were there unrepresented, and they couldn't seem to stop arguing with one another long enough to talk about anything substantive. And it wasn't that this was an experienced mediator who had lots of skills and techniques and strategies. And she was just flummoxed by this. She had tried this intervention and that intervention and that intervention. And she said, I'm ready to throw up my hands and just say, get out of here, go see a judge, go to an arbitrator. You can't do it. That was the situation that she wanted to talk through. Another was a mediator who presented, and this was a family dispute in which the parties agreed to come to mediation, but then one of the parties could never sort of find the time in the schedule to fit something. Oh, yeah, that date looks good, but then no, it doesn't, and it wouldn't. And the mediator wanted to talk through what would be some good strategies for her to use in dealing with situations like that. So I could go on, but these are some of the types of situations that, that people bring to the reflective practice group. So let me define reflective practice for you, excuse me. So it's a conversation in which the mentor helps the practitioner discover insights into or solutions for puzzling practice situations. It's really important to understand this as a conversation because it's not an interrogation. It isn't that the debriefer, if you will, the mentor, doesn't go endlessly into lots and lots of details. Usually when the case is presented, the situation is presented, the mediator will describe in 5 or 6 minutes the situation. And sometimes there's a need to ask for clarification on some additional pieces of context. But by and large, that's it. And then the mediator say, this is the problem. This is my question that I want to address. There are 2 fundamental principles that guide our work. One, the belief that practitioners can make sense of and find their own answers. Very much tracks the notion of self-determination. We believe that it is that while we could answer, those of us in the group could say, oh yeah, you could try this, you could try this, you could try this, you could try this. That by and large, it's better for the person to struggle with the problem themselves and to, with our help, think through what's likely to be the best result. And the other part of it is because of our belief that self-discovery results in learning that's practical, meaning that it addresses the specific problem the mediator has presented. And it allows the mediator to learn something that they can carry with them in future situations. So those are really important. So the other reason that we, and I'm going to come to this again, the other reason that we don't offer advice is because it tends to limit the person's thinking. As soon as you offer advice, they're then thinking about what you have said instead of thinking about their own experience. So, and we want the person to think about her or his own experience. So in our reflective practice groups, a non-judgmental discussion of practice questions. We never second guess, we never judge somebody. It shuts them down, causes people to be defensive, and it causes them to focus on us rather than on themselves. We rely on the participant's own knowledge and experience. The emphasis on individualized learning and self-exploration is, you'll see it's sort of like a mantra with me, that's so key. What's also really happens is, and this occurred yesterday in one of the reflective practice groups, one person presented a problem, and at the end when she said, I'm done, every other person in the group, and there were 7 other people, said, let me tell you what I learned from what you just did. What you just talked about was really helpful to me. I can see how that's going to make a difference in my own practice. So it is a benefit, not just to the individual, but it has group benefits as well. So here's the basic process that we use for reflective debrief. We start at the top. We trust that the person who's presenting is there to learn what it is that she might need to learn. So they ask the question. This is what I'm struggling with. We don't assume what the problem is. She defines it, or he. Second, The mediator limits the scope of the debrief in two respects. One, they choose the issues they want to talk about. And also, I have a rule that says when the mediator says, I'm done, then he's done. When they're finished with the conversation, doesn't matter whether I think that there might be much more to explore. I trust that the person, if they've reached a point where they're saturated with the experience, they get to say, stop. Next, I never use a statement when a question will do. We use lots and lots and lots of questions because we're trying to elicit, draw out from the mediator what's going on from them, what they're struggling with. Second, so we support the idea of self-exploration and self-discovery. Our job is not to get the mediator to understand anything. That's not our responsibility. So that's another reason why we don't offer advice. We don't want them to necessarily do something that we want. We need them to find the answer that's most suitable to their method of practice, to who they are as a practitioner. That's the goal, is to enhance the quality of their practice as they want to practice mediation. Quick story about no need for reassurance. I studied transactional analysis in the 1970s for 3 years. And in our group, we would practice on one another. Somebody would be the therapist and somebody would have a therapeutic problem. And in one of the situations I recall, one of my fellow trainees was very emotional, and the trainee therapist reached for a box of tissues. And our trainer put out his hand and stopped him. And when they finished, he said, the reason that I stopped you was this. The person who was crying, that's their experience. They saw the box of tissues there. If they wanted the box of tissues, they could either reach for it or they could ask for it. As soon as you reach for the box of tissues and offer it, then that shifts the focus to you and to what you've just done. Leave them be. Let them have the experience. It's being respectful, it's being dignified, but also it's for the therapeutic benefit of the individual. So we don't offer reassurance. We don't say, oh, wow, that was a really tough one. Oh, I wouldn't have wanted to be in your shoes. Oh, you really had a hard day, didn't you? We don't do that. Maybe at the end, when it's all said and done, we will offer that. And maybe at the end, if the person is still struggling and asks for some advice, and they're specific about what kind of advice they want, we will also offer advice. But we do it at their request and after we've explored the other possibilities. So the last piece I want to say is this. I encourage people to start reflective practice groups, and I am quite willing to be a resource in helping you do that and finding the experience. As Jean said in her introduction, I currently facilitate reflective practice groups for the ABA section of dispute resolution, for Academy of Professional Family Mediators, for the Nebraska Mediators Association, and for the Association for Conflict Resolution, along with 3 groups of mediators in Ireland. And I see how, and if you were to talk to the members of those groups, they would tell you how valuable the experience is of being in community and learning together. So here are some thoughts if you're thinking about starting a group. Decide whether you want a homogeneous or mixed group. Do you just want to focus on one sort of practice, commercial, construction, family, environmental? Do you want a facilitator, somebody whose job is to manage the conversation in the group? That doesn't mean that others in the group don't participate. It's only that at least you have one sort of leader in the group. Or are you going to do self-managed? Third, we're not going to meet in person very much in the near future anyway. But in the future, the question is, do you meet in person or by video? All of the groups I have started meet by video and have done so before. And the reason is because of geography. You know, one of my groups, we have two of us from Florida, somebody from Massachusetts, people from California, people from Arizona, and someone from South Africa. Well, obviously we couldn't do any of that. No matter COVID notwithstanding, we couldn't do that in person. You do a drop-in or fixed membership. The ABA group, for example, is drop-in. You come any month. You can show up for 5 months and skip 3. It's entirely up to the individual. The other groups are all fixed membership, and the expectation and the hope is that people show up every single month. Then there are the obvious questions about logistics. And then what's really important also are just having the basic ground rules about confidentiality and about not offering opinions. So last, and then we'll turn to some questions. I'll leave you with this. This is the book I most recently wrote about reflective practice and conflict resolution. And there's a link. It's available on Amazon. But this is the link to my publisher, Rowman and Littlefield. I'm also offering, and this is my email address, and I am offering any of you who are interested in starting a reflective practice group or joining one, if you have questions, if you'd like additional material that I couldn't go into in detail in this brief webinar, if you'd like to learn more about reflective practice generally and have additional resources, I have any number of articles and other things that are available on PDF, and I would be absolutely delighted to share it with you. I believe so much in this process for enhancing the quality of our work that I want others to have the experience and to learn from it in their own ways. So I'm happy to do that. So let's see if there are questions.
Thank you for that fascinating presentation, Michael. There is a question here. Can you clarify avoiding providing reassurance? Does that mean that we should avoid showing empathy, even when caucusing with someone?
Oh, I'm just talking in the context of our reflective practice group. And the reason and this, I guess this really does apply in practice as well, that expressions of empathy, compassion, support, and encouragement, if they are done strategically because they support the party, then that's fine. But we need to be mindful that our desire to be helpful, to be empathetic, shouldn't interfere with the client's experience. It should enhance it. So I am by nature, thanks to my mom, a very, very empathetic person. You know, like I am right now, I tear up at the least, you know, sort of situation that calls on one's empathy. So I think it's really important, but we need to be really mindful of using it very, very carefully and strategically, so that it doesn't distract the party from their need to do what they're doing.
Okay. And a practical question, is there an optimal size for a reflective practice group?
I think, you know, 10 is a good size, dozen probably. Our ABA group, we can have as many as, some months we have 8 and some months we have 22. And we managed to make it work. Most of the groups I work with, though, are 8 to 12 people. It's a good number, I think. You can make it work well with fewer. I see my good friend Ava there, and she's been in a reflective practice group for donkey's years, right? And I think, there may be 6 people in her group.
We
No.
have 6 people. We've been together, I think, 8 years.
I also want to say one thing I wanted to mention, because reflective practice process is also really, really useful in trainings. If I can do this without choking up too much, I see old colleague, friend, Barbara Wilson, who has developed a process called MELI that she uses in her trainings that mirrors, it's different, and yet it mirrors the principles that I've been talking about in terms of reflective practice. And it's an extraordinary experience for the people in the training program to go through that.
Okay. Top of the hour. Jean, you want to wrap it up?
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael. It was a pleasure. I mean, the comments that are in the chat are just so heartfelt in thanking you and in appreciating the information that you provided, the sentiment of everything. So on behalf of everyone, I mean, we had, I think it was over 100 people at one point were on, and thank you so much. And I'm sure people will be in touch with you. And thank you everyone for your generosity, and we'll look forward to seeing you same time. Well, this time next week, next Thursday. Take care. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.